I had only some business contact with him because Miramax owned Nanny McPhee for a while and were very, very difficult and obstructive about, because his bullying behaviour patterns also existed in his business world. And so my really main contact with him was shouting at him down the phone that I never wanted to work with him ever, ever, ever. And so when I came into rooms where he was, which often happened, he would look, well, actually frightened. Because I think that's the sort of thing that happens. If you call a bully on their behaviour, they tend to avoid you.
So you called him out for being a bully to women?
Yeah, not to women. This was in his business practice. I didn't know about these things, but they don't surprise me at all, and they're endemic to the system anyway. And what I find sort of extraordinary is that this man is at the top of a very particular iceberg, and I don't think you can describe him as a sex addict. He's a predator. That's different. He's, as it were, the top of the ladder is a system of harassment and belittling and bullying and interference and what my mother would have referred to in the olden days as pestering. Is he pestering you? That's the word we used to use in the olden days, if you recall. This has been part of our world, women's world, since time immemorial. So what we need to start talking about is the crisis in masculinity, the crisis of extreme masculinity, which is this sort of behaviour, and the fact that it is not only okay, but it also is represented by the most powerful man in the world at the moment.
So when you describe him as being the tip of the iceberg, do you think there are others like that in your industry in Hollywood?
Of course.
Many?
Many.
To that degree?
Maybe not to that degree. Do they have to all be as bad as him to make it count? Does it only count if you really have done it to loads and loads and loads of women, or does it count if you do it to one woman once? I think the latter.
It's been written up that you rebuked him on the Brideshead set for trying to put your co-star on a diet. What happened then?
Well, it wasn't Harvey, actually. It was the other producers, and I just... My co-star, yes, had been told
it wasn't him, then?
By the producers that she had to lose weight, and I said that I would walk from the film if I heard anything like that again. I mean, I will always speak up because I'm bolshy and will take someone's head off if I see anything like that happen. But I'm lucky. I've had education. I'm white, which makes it easier for me to speak up, for instance, than any woman of colour. I've worked sort of independently until I was 30, so I was always extremely feminist, extremely aware of the oppressions and just the little run of small cruelties, humiliations that women all experience. I mean, there are 66 million people in this country, and maybe 35 million of them are women. Now, you speak to any of those women over the age of 15, and they will all have a story to tell you about some kind of harassment, whether it's being felt up on the tube, happened to my daughter the other day, whether it's being 9 years old at a children's party and some magician sticking his tongue down my throat, whether it's being in a lift with an older, powerful man who I was getting on with quite well when I was 24 and suddenly he lunged at me. Everybody's got stories like that. Everyone.
When you knew Harvey Weinstein as a bully, is that something that you would have passed on to other people? Did you tell people that that was what you'd encountered, or did you feel that wasn't your place?
No, I didn't. I mean, we discussed it. I discussed it at length with my producer, Lindsay Duran. We discussed the fact that we were really glad to get our property away from him, and I often expressed the feeling that I had of, I mean, whenever I was in a room with him, he gave off the most appalling aura.
So how would you explain, we know now that people knew about this for decades, his sexual behaviour, the directors, the agents, the fixers who seem to push these women, actresses, into the lion's mouth. How do you explain that?
Isn't it the same story as Jimmy Savile? It's the same story, Emily. If someone's powerful, you can say, as the nurses used to do in those hospitals, right. Be careful, be careful.
Pretend you're asleep.
Pretend you're asleep. So some of the agents may have said, look, he's a little bit oily, he's a little bit this. Don't worry, again, he might pester you a bit, but go in. Because one of the big problems about the way in which our systems work at the moment is that there are so many blind eyes, and we can't keep making the women to whom this happens responsible. They're the ones who've got to speak. Why?
But
we've got to look and say this is happening and say this is happening.
But the difference with the nurses is they were trying to protect the patients from somebody that they knew was predatory. With directors or agents or fixers, they were pushing these women sometimes into his line of fire.
Yeah, it's pretty filthy, right? That's a conspiracy of silence. And I think there are probably about 1 million missed opportunities to call this man out on his disgusting behaviour.
His spokeswoman has said that the sex that he had was consensual. You will have heard, as I have heard, of certain women who choose to play the game in Hollywood, that they know it's a hugely competitive industry, that they reckon or make the decision that a sexual favour may be worth a part in a blockbuster movie. That does go on, doesn't it?
Of course, I'm sure it does. I think that one of the points made today actually by women in film is that one of the ways in which we can avoid that kind of power, because that's a power struggle. That's not about their decision being a wrong decision. That's about the system being so wrong that their only choice, they see their only choice to be this choice that isn't a choice. In fact, it's about power. It's about that I have no power. And that's because in our systems, there are not nearly enough women, particularly in Hollywood, in positions of power. There aren't enough women at the top of the tree in the studios who could perhaps balance everything out. There aren't enough women on set. You know, crews can be very, with young women in particular. There just aren't enough women, actually. So this is part of our difficulty. This is part of the rebalancing. This is a gender dysfunction, and the other thing it is a public health issue. This is not about one man's crimes against women. This is about our system's imbalances, our system's gender crisis. And we have to act on this. We have to turn this on its head. We can't allow this to continue, because what it means is naturally vulnerable people are going to continue to be preyed upon, whether Harvey Weinstein goes to jail or not.
This is not about victim blaming, but the culture of couch casting, where women feel that they may have to give sexual favours for parts, is something that has been going on for decades.
Since women were women.
So what happens if they just say no?
Sometimes they don't get the part.
Really?
Well, unless you've got producers next to those directors who are saying, I think that one's the best one. And the director's saying, no, I think, you know, and the producer says, that's because you've slept with her. You made her sleep with you. That's what's got to happen. People have to be called out on their behaviour. All the time.
Yeah.
That's all the time.
Do you think there's a liberal hypocrisy at the bottom of all this? I mean, one word, Polanski. Is there a sense that we forgive artistic people on one level because we think, oh, they're creating great art.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And in fact, actually, I have a good in on that, because I have a part to play in that. Because when I was working with Mike Nichols, a man I loved, he asked me to sign a petition when Polanski was to be extradited. Do you remember? It was about 15 years ago. And I signed it without really thinking about it. And then I was called on it by some young feminists at my son's university. And they said, this man's a rapist. He raped this woman. I watched the documentaries about it, and I decided that I had been wrong, that I had been absolutely, as you say, bamboozled by, not only by Mike's influence over me, but by my respect for his art. Absolutely. So I stood back, I took my name off the petition and explained myself to those who supported Polanski.
So what should happen now? Do you think, on a practical level, his CBE should be revoked?
Sure. I mean, you know, that's not the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me is that we extrapolate from this event what's really going on. That's what's most important. Otherwise, all that's going to happen is everyone is going to go, well, do you remember Jimmy Savile? Do you remember Harvey Weinstein? And not go, what we need to say is we need to change this. If we want to do something, we have to get more women into this profession in positions of power.
This is the moment you say, I think Hollywood will now change. Can you say that hand on heart?
No, I can't. I can't, but I do see and hear a lot of voices, And I do want to add mine to theirs and say that Hollywood can and must change.
And if everyone is talking about Harvey Weinstein right now, and you've suggested there are probably plenty of others who are guilty of pretty similar behaviour, why aren't people coming out about the others?
I think it's hard. Actually, some people, I mean, from what I've read, some women have absolutely said that other directors have tried it on with them. Some women have come out and said that, actually, if you look at the materials. Perhaps the more of us who say this is endemic, let's just say it's endemic. You know, I mean, I've just said I've spent my 20s trying to get old men's tongues out of my mouth, you know, because they were just thought, well, she's up for it. You know, so I would imagine that happens really very regularly. And so perhaps this is a moment when we can say to men and women, open your eyes and open your mouths and say something.